Hi, I'm Alex.
And I'm Shane.
And this is the RPM podcast.
And welcome back to day 10 of our 10 days of season reviews for the 2021 season. And of course, we're going to be talking about the Mercedes team and how well they've done in 2021, comparing them to last year and what our thoughts and opinions are going forward into the new regulations of 2022. So to summarize, Mercedes continue to break records this year by topping the Constructors' Championship for the 8th time. They've successfully won every year in the turbo hybrid era. In 2021, Mercedes scored 613.5 points, which beats 2020, where they finished with 573 points. So they've beaten their previous year. Now, Mercedes were at a kind of a lose-lose situation going into this season because you've set the record so high. They've won drivers, they've won constructors, they've won drivers and constructors and drivers and constructors. They've done that for years. If they didn't win both championships this year, it was always going to be a catastrophic blow to the team, to the image of the company, to the sport as a whole, if you're a Mercedes fan. And they did. They only won the Constructors' Championship, which everyone seems to forget about because it's a massively
including
important...
Mercedes themselves at the end of the
season.
Yeah,
Mercedes forgot about it for 3 days until they piped up on Twitter and Instagram again. But we won't go into that. You can listen to our post-race discussion at Abu Dhabi if you want to hear our thoughts and opinions about that. But ultimately, Mercedes won the Constructors' Championship, and they did this by Lewis scoring 387.5 points. On a side note, I hate these 0.5. It just doesn't roll off the tongue as well as it should do. And Valtteri Bottas, 226 points. Both drivers scoring a personal or a season best of first place. Bottas did that at Turkey, and Lewis did that at 8 races this year, which seems like an awful lot, but compared to Max Verstappen, wasn't quite enough. But we're not talking about the Drivers' Championship. We're talking about the Constructors' Championship and how it all unfolded in 2021. Alex, for the last time in this 10 days of season reviews, what do you make of the Mercedes team?
Yeah, it's interesting to think that, like you say, they've won every single Constructors' Championship of this era. I mean, their dominance is just unbelievable. And I think that's part of the reason why they reacted the way they did at the end of the season, even taking into consideration the controversial circumstances surrounding that final race. This is a team that is not accustomed to being anything other than top dog since 2014. All this time, they just win and win and win and win, and finally it's not gone their way. And yeah, the circumstances are controversial, but just the fact that they've lost, I think even if it had been fair and square, they would have found it hard to take, because that's what it's like when you're constantly winning. You know, suddenly you find it difficult to understand it any other way. So breaking this record again, most consecutive constructors titles. Remember when we were talking about their downfall being predicted after preseason testing? We saw that the W12 appeared to be a bit of a handful, what with the regulation changes, and they really had to fight for this one, even though the regulation change didn't seem to hurt them too much, and then they won 3 of the first 4 races, so they seemed fairly comfortable straight off the bat despite that. But they were no longer dominating pole position. They were no longer landing reams of consecutive wins and 1-2 finishes like we've seen in previous years. But they didn't break under the pressure, nonetheless. They still held out to take the Constructors' title. And it seems pretty certain that they'll be back with a vengeance in 2022. I don't think they're suddenly going to stop just because this has happened. I was trying to, when I was writing up these notes and thinking about this podcast, I was trying to think of what the team did wrong to lose. And the only thing that I can really think of is their disastrous pit stop for Bottas in Monaco. The only thing that's like the team's fault. That was the only thing that really comes to mind. Is there anything that I'm forgetting that maybe we could pin on Mercedes?
No. No, there isn't much at all, is there? If anything, like that pit stop was atrocious and would have scored them a handful more points, but they've already secured their Constructors' Championship. Maybe they could have not made Lewis and Max come out together at Italy going into turn 1. I don't know, but that's not the team. I mean, in hindsight, you probably would have tried to avoid that, but it's racing at the end of the day. But the team have been superb this year.
Yeah, let's talk about the two drivers then in focus, because if there are any sort of potential issues to do with why they didn't end up with Hamilton top dog, I guess it's to do with the drivers. Um, let's start with Hamilton then. I think with his 387.5 points, as you say, it doesn't really roll off the tongue particularly well, but he did end up with 8 wins and another 9 podiums on top of that. You know, the most statistically successful driver of all time finally walks away from a season without taking the driver's title since 2016. I think 2021 though saw Hamilton as his absolute best though, because he had to compete with Red Bull and the resolute Max Verstappen. I still can't wrap my head around his win at Interlagos, which, new engine or not, is still a landmark Hamilton victory. It was this season that he reached 100 pole positions. It was this season that he reached 100 race wins. The highs were very, very high indeed. But with the tough nature of this season in particular, they came with some pretty tough lows as well. He only has himself to blame for the botched restart in Baku, which you already mentioned before. I think when we were talking about Red Bull, and he accidentally knocked his brake magic back on, I think.
Yeah.
Obviously, he had to take the lion's share of the blame for Silverstone, although admittedly that didn't really seem to hurt him at that race. He had like a 10-second penalty, but still went on to win. And he really should have listened to his team regarding the pit stops in Turkey as well. He was pretty resistant to what was going on there, and I think that his team had the better measure of things. I think where did he finish at that race? It was like P5. P5 was it or something? I was going to say P7. Yeah, P5. Okay. So yeah, I think he could have done a lot better than then if he'd maybe listened to his team a little more. But he did also have a bit of bad luck in Monaco. He didn't finish very well there, but he missed out on that final run in qualifying because of the red flag. And then it being Monaco, wherever you qualify, barring unexpected circumstances, that's probably where you're going to finish, because it's just not designed for the current era of cars at all. He wasn't at fault in Italy, in my book, and it wasn't enough to take the championship. But I have to say, it's been a very long time since I've been quite so entertained by Hamilton on track. We really saw the best of him this year, I think.
Yeah, his driving it's always been great. But this year it's been superb. We've seen the absolute best. We've seen him on the edge of what that car can physically do, and probably on the edge of what he can physically do as well, because we've heard him on the radio, out of breath, gasping, thirsty. Obviously driving a Formula 1 car is no easy thing to do, but he's putting everything he could possibly do into the sport, and it's showing because he cares so much. If you were to pinpoint one part of the season where he let that drivers' championship maybe slip, Max, it's easy with Max to compare. It's easy when you look at Max's results and go, you just see P1 and P2 and the rest of them are DNFs. Lewis and Max have the same, not the same number of DNFs, but they have obviously Italy together. But the highlight for me is Azerbaijan, where Max had a tyre failure and scored no points. And Lewis was leading that race. Or then I can't remember what the positions were going into that accident, but then Lewis was in P1 going into the restart with a couple of laps to go, and not putting on that button or switching off that button has cost him dearly. And that, if you ask me, like you said, Monaco, you can't really do much about. If you qualify bad and get stuck behind traffic, you got nothing going on. But Azerbaijan should have been a first or a second place. And that would have been the difference between first place in the Drivers' Championship and second place in the Drivers' Championship. And it's harsh that you pinpoint one exact moment in this season, but when both drivers have been so incredibly good, you've got to look at Azerbaijan as one of the worst results. And it's got nothing to do with the team. It wasn't a botched pit stop. It was just a mistake. And that mistake has cost what I personally think is Lewis's 8th World Championship.
Yeah, that does feel like the big one, doesn't it? You remember it's almost shocking to see him make a mistake that big, that huge lockup. Because obviously initially we didn't know what it was. We just initially saw him having a massive lockup and going straight on into turn one, and Perez obviously leaping into the lead. So it's very uncharacteristic. But then, like we've said, this was a really tough season. Lewis Hamilton is a human being after all, and the pressure must have been getting to both him and Verstappen throughout the course of the season, especially as Verstappen was racking up these consecutive wins. Whereas Hamilton, I feel like Lewis Hamilton only managed a couple of, like he wasn't full of consecutive wins like he had been in the past. I think he only managed, 3 in a row was his best?
And that was towards the end, wasn't it?
Brazil, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia.
Should have been 4, but we won't talk about that.
Yeah. But it's very sort of unusual for him to be in that scenario, really. I guess you must get used to it to some degree. I mean, I find it hard to believe. I know that in front of the press, it's all, we're not going to take it for granted. We're going to keep pushing, blah, 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 blah. But, as a human being, to some degree, you must kind of get used to it and come to expect that level of performance again and again. And then when it's suddenly slipping through your fingers and you're making your own mistakes, that's got to be tough. And the guy is, 36 now, Lewis Hamilton? So he's still performing at an astonishing level. So let's see if he can do it again next year, because seems to me that he still wants to try and get that number 8. I don't think he's going to be content with equaling that Schumacher record. He wants to unequivocally be the best of the best in terms of numbers. Like statistically, he wants to ensure that that's most successful driver status, I think.
And I think it'll take some beating as well, to be fair, with Lewis Hamilton. It's not a record which is going to be broke anytime soon. Even if Max Verstappen goes on to win and win and win and win, we've still got years and years until that statistic is even close to being broken.
Yeah, it will take a very long time. I'm not sure how many wins Verstappen has in total, but it's a long way off 100. What's Hamilton on now? 102? 102
yeah, something
wins?
like that. Yeah.
Max Verstappen has 20 wins.
Yeah. It's got a couple of years left.
It's got a little way to go. Let's talk about Bottas then. 226 points, just the 1 win and 10 podiums to go on top of that. I feel like I'm repeating myself every time I have to assess Bottas, because
I'm so sorry, Dave.
Yeah, his seasons always look so familiar. Not a bad showing, some highlights, some bad luck, but ultimately just nowhere near Hamilton, and still just too many mistakes, too much poor overtaking and defending ability. Just doesn't seem to do particularly well when he's in traffic. He's just too slow to overtake, too relaxed in his defending style. It just keeps any chance of fighting for the title firmly out of reach. But let's start with some highlights. What are your Valtteri Bottas highlights of 2021? Do you need a minute?
One. I was just, I'm just looking at his results, and it's just he is somewhat consistent in the sense that he scores. He's on the podium more races than he isn't in 3rd place. But he's always behind Max and Lewis. There was no standout performance. Turkey was great. It has to be Turkey because that was his only win. But with the highs, there comes so many inconsistent lows as well. There's so many poor performances that it just drowns out the highs, if you ask me. We should be celebrating the fact that he got how many podiums this year? Did you say 8 podiums?
So he had 10 podiums on top of his win, yeah.
And which is great for any driver on the grid. That's a substantial win. But when you've been in that car now for as many years as he has since 2017, and each year I'm pretty sure each year before we even doing the podcast, we were like, oh, maybe he'll be better next year. He'll be better next year. He'll be more consistent next year. And now there isn't going to be a next year, and it kind of just summarizes Bottas's career. He has been a great wingman this year, and ultimately they have secured the Constructors' Championship because of the points he has outscored Perez on. Because obviously Lewis finished behind Max, so Bottas had to finish so many more points in front of Perez, which is what he's done, which is great. But it just feels slightly underwhelming this year. Only 1 race win as well. That's not on.
Well, in the 5 years that he's been at Mercedes, this is his 3rd best result, I think, because he had 300, in terms of points, because 326 points in 2019 when he was 2nd in the championship, and then 305 points in his first year at Mercedes in 2017, and then this year he had 226 points. So he had 3 more points than he did last year, but finished 3rd instead of 2nd.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit, well, it's classic sort of Bottas inconsistency where it's a bit up and down. Yeah, you mentioned Turkey. That's definitely his biggest highlight because he not only did he win, but he won very handily as well. He was like 15 seconds in the lead, and he looked very comfortable out there. So that was definitely his best result, and it was one of those results where you're thinking he's clearly a good driver. He can clearly do this, but he just can't do it every week. Another example of that was Italy, where he started at the back of the grid after the sprint. I think because he had to take an engine penalty, I believe.
He did, yeah.
So then he was at the back of the grid,
started rolling in,
and then he ended up on the podium. So ultimately that was a really good result. And of course, we talked a lot about the battle of the wingmen that we were cataloguing throughout the season. He was the winner. He was the winner of the battle of the wingmen, really, because like you said, he brought the points home to give the team that constructors championship, and I think he has the more consistent results compared to Perez. Perez was obviously instrumental to Verstappen's total win in the final race, but Bottas has got 6 more podiums. He took his win on pace rather than inheriting his win like Perez did, and he helped them secure their title. So he had a few things that were a bit more, more like bad luck or unfortunate. He was the victim of that collision at Imola, where obviously Russell got onto the grass. He was a victim in that terrible race-ending pit stop in Monaco. I still don't think I've seen anything like that before. He was rammed by Ricciardo in Mexico. After he started on pole, he had his unfortunate puncture in Qatar. But what about the lowlights, if you like, of Bottas? Where were you particularly disappointed in the Finn in trying to sort of cement himself in that Mercedes seat?
Hungary this year was one of his lowest points. It's hard to pinpoint anything else for me personally. Before we get on to that, just going on the back of like his unfortune, he's had to take so many engine penalties this year as well, which I know a tiny bit of that's down to the driving style and how much like you're over revving or how you're changing gear, etc. But obviously a lot of it's down to the wear and tear of the engine. And we knew that Mercedes engine was wearing a lot quicker than the Honda engine. So he's been quite unlucky in the sense that he's had grid penalties upon grid penalties upon grid penalties he's had to deal with. But yeah, dropping back into Hungary, that start was just atrocious. It must have been such a low point for him, because as much as he had taken out one of the Red Bulls and I think 5 cars, I think he impacted. Ricciardo got spun, Max Verstappen got hit, Lance Stroll also, he was a separate incident. He went on the grass. Perez was out.
Norris was out.
Norris was out. It was not a good day for Mercedes and especially Bottas.
And it's easy to look at the actual consequences of it and say, well, I suppose it was probably good news for Mercedes because both Red Bulls were essentially sort of removed from competition. But that could have so easily been his teammate.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
So it's just, when you're fighting in that position, a mistake like that is pretty hard to forgive. There's also he had other issues outside his big one, obviously. There was, I'm just looking through my notes on here. Here we are. I've lost where Bottas was on here. We talked about Imola. He really shouldn't have been battling a Williams for position, really, in the second round. Like, it wasn't his fault, but it was also the fact that whilst his teammate was fighting for the win, he wasn't even in the points positions. And it's really just down to him being not very good in the wet. Like, he's never really had that aptitude for the mixed conditions. The same was true in Belgium because he was predictably poor in the wet qualifying there. He was about as much use as a marzipan stepladder in Azerbaijan. He just didn't do anything. He was just absolutely nowhere for both qualifying and the race.
But he should have won that.
Yeah, he could have been there to pick up that win, and he just did nothing. He was just nowhere. Yeah. And even he was like, I don't really know what happened. So, he also, there was just too many examples of him just not being able to overtake slower cars. For example, the one that comes to mind for me was in the US Grand Prix. He was stuck behind Tsunoda for ages.
That's what comes to my mind, yeah.
And you're just thinking,
7 laps.
Why can't he get... It's not like it's a track where it's hard to overtake. Why can't he get past? So
you're in a Mercedes.
There's just so many examples where he just doesn't seem to do very well. He's not aggressive enough overtaking, and he's not stalwart enough in his defending. So it's and he's not a bad driver, as we've said plenty of times before. He's not a bad driver. He just lacks a certain kind of exceptional quality. So now it looks like he's going to have to reacquaint himself with the lower half of the grid as he travels to Alfa Romeo next year. We kind of touched a little bit on this when we talked about Alfa Romeo. Is sort of the Bottas's chance of being a sort of top tier driver, is that just over now? Is that sort of the end of his career as a potential race winning driver?
Unless Alfa Romeo starts to win races next year, then I would say yes, because there's so much talent in the field right now, and there's so much talent waiting to join Formula One. I think Bottas is lucky to maintain a seat in the current situation. We've got so many drivers wanting to come through, and yet somehow Bottas has managed to maintain the seat. And I say somehow, maybe I shouldn't say somehow, because he's a great driver. He's gone up against Lewis Hamilton and won on many occasions. Outqualified Lewis Hamilton on many occasions. So he's a great tutor. And I imagine that's what his skill set will be in Alfa Romeo. And, I don't know how long that will last for. But I don't think it'll be a championship. I don't think he'll be challenging for the championship ever again.
So looking at 2022, Mercedes now, obviously, they just said it before, they're just too used to winning to stop now. They'll be very hungry to take constructors title number 9 and obviously try and help Hamilton get his record-breaking driver's title. If they can, of course, they've got to bring that car first. They've already fired up their new car, haven't they?
A lot earlier than we were expecting them to.
Yeah, it's very unusual for someone to do their fire-up video before the new year has even started.
Yeah, that's how hungry they are.
I'm not quite sure what's that supposed to indicate. Like, are they overplaying their hand a bit? Are they, it's still an unusual thing to do, really. They
it's
don't
all
need
mind
to
games.
do that. But yeah,
I don't think it was for the public.
Games, really.
I think it was just mind games.
Yeah. But of course, going into the new season, will sparks fly between the two British drivers that now complete their lineup? Because, of course, we've got Russell and Hamilton alongside each other. I think that it could be potentially interesting, those two, because Russell is
hungry.
Russell is hungry, yeah, and he's quite strong-willed. He's quite outspoken, and I think that him and Hamilton are a potentially lethal combination on track. But it's whether or not they're going to be lethal for their competition or for each other. I think we could see some sparks fly.
Yeah, it's a very interesting pairing. Russell has got a persona about him very similar to Ricciardo, but Ricciardo's obviously been in that Red Bull and has had great wins and great overtakes and has built that reputation. Russell has built this reputation around him being in a Williams and obviously his junior career as well. So I feel like everyone is expecting him to be this incredible driver where he takes a challenge to Lewis and the top half of the grid and challenges them for race wins and podiums, etc. Yet to be seen if this would actually materialize. Obviously, we had that one race in the Mercedes, but that was one race against Bottas in the Mercedes. It wasn't against Lewis Hamilton, who's just lost his Drivers' World Championship. I think Lewis will come back stronger than ever and really hungry to break those records and face adversity and just be this will be it. I think for Lewis, it will be everything. It'll be absolutely everything. I think we're in for a treat with him next year. As for Russell, like you said, it could be a spectacular pairing with those two. Imagine those two, 1 and 2, leading the field, like not necessarily fighting each other, but two Mercedes separated by a couple of seconds, just winning every single race. That's how strong I think they could be. But equally, it could be a Lewis and Nico situation where they both think they could. Imagine if George starts challenging Lewis for wins. Lewis isn't going to sit kindly with that. He's going to defend as hard as he can, and he's been defending Max Verstappen this year or attacking Max Verstappen this year. So he's got a couple of tricks under his book, and I think it's a very interesting pairing. I think the word you used was explosive, and I think that summarizes it pretty well.
Question is, of course, will the nature of this championship and the way that Hamilton has lost it inspire him to go a bit further than he might have done otherwise? Because when Hamilton first, I don't think we should paint a picture of Hamilton having always been this angelic driver who never did anything that was a bit dirty. Because when he first started, he was known for being quite aggressive.
Yeah.
Yeah, when he first started, that was how he really made his mark as a driver, as there was this young buck who suddenly came in and was prepared to really throw himself around. He was quite outspoken, and it was only later on in his career that he tried to become a bit more of an example and perhaps gained a bit more of a sort of a good boy kind of image. But maybe this has emboldened him to go a bit further than he might have done and return to his slightly more, vicarious, youthful roots. We'll see. We'll see if that will inspire him. Right, that's it. That's our last season review done and dusted with Mercedes. This time next year, we'll be doing this all again, and who knows what order we'll be doing it in. Very much looking forward to that. We've got a whole season to go through first. But for now, thanks very much for joining us for our season review episodes. Do send us any thoughts or questions you have to us at RacePerMinute on Twitter. You can get in touch at RacePerMinute.com as well. There's a contact form on there. You can comment below if you're on YouTube. If you enjoyed this episode, do give us a rating or a like wherever you are, and subscribe to get all the latest episodes in your inbox wherever it is you're getting Race Per Minute. If you really want to support the show and help us keep the quality content coming and receive some lovely rewards, you can do so with as little as £1 a month at patreon.com/RacePerMinute. We've set up a sort of modest target to cover the cost. I think it's about £25 a month just to cover all the costs of the podcast. So if you're interested, do take a look at that on Patreon. And that's it for our season review. I think the next thing, we're still not completely done with 2021 because we're going to do a little reaction to our bold predictions that we made right at the beginning of the season. Just a little bit of fun to see what we said. I've been piecing together some little clips of what we said in that episode. So we'll have a little reaction to that, and just as a bit of fun. And then after that, I suppose the next thing we'll be looking forward to the new season. We've got pre-season testing, etc. to look forward to. So thanks very much for joining us for our season reviews, and we'll see you again very soon.
See you soon.